Some people are not going to like this at all, Admiral muttered, after James had returned to bring the good news to everyone. By now, the humans and Shida were no longer alone in the room. Since James had gone to have his private conversation, the others hadn't sat on their hands. They had made sure that everyone was up on their feet and awaiting what would come of the call between James and the UHSDF's political liaison. To make everyone as comfortable as possible, the smaller attendants had positioned themselves in a circle in the middle of the room. Admir, Nia, Tuya, Athena, Andrej, Coco and Shida sat closely to each other, while Curie stood a bit off to the side. Meanwhile, Conglorch had laid himself down onto his long belly along one of the hive room's empty walls, and Moore had sat down on the large bed so she could relax her old joints a bit. James walked up to the circle and sighed as he began to also lower himself to sit down with his legs crossed. "I'm not even sure if I like it, and I'm the one benefiting from it," he said, with a mixture of a chuckle and a tired exhale. "Usually I'm not that fond of the government strong-arming their opinions into the people." "Hey!" Coco quickly admonished him and lightly jabbed against his shoulder. "Don't let those protests get to you. I know it's intimidating to see thousands of people marching against you, but that's just it. They are thousands. There are billions of people on Earth. And if all of those were against you, the governments wouldn't be in support of you. Trust me." She switched from her jab into putting a firm hand onto James's shoulder while looking him directly into the eyes. "I know it's important to question yourself before making big decisions, and it's good that you're doing that, but you are not the bad guy here, Jamie," she said, in a very strict voice. "It's great that you want to make sure everything is done properly, and I love that you want to make as many people as possible happy, but please, just trust that at least some others know what they are doing as well. You have said it yourself multiple times. You can't do it all. You have the amazing opportunity to try and make things better here, so please don't ruin yourself by bruising your brain about every little thing. I know the politicians are far from perfect, we all know that. But do you really think every single one of them would risk their career and their reputation just to help you, if they expected that their people wouldn't have their backs? You know they play it safer than that." James closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled. "Yeah," he finally said, after a couple of seconds. Opening his eyes again, they had a new sense of vigor behind them. "Yeah, you're right. I can't let the simple things get to me like that." With a smirk, Coco heavily slapped against his shoulder again, before pulling her arm back and leaning back onto her hands. "Attaboy," she mumbled. "Alright, so what's the plan?" Andrej then asked, turning his crimson gaze towards James. "I'm assuming we will get some guidelines at some point, but what until then?" James put his elbow onto one of his knees and leaned his head against his flat palm. "Well, we were lucky enough to get into this race early. Now we have to make that head start count because our competition will surely do the same," he said, and furrowed his brow for a moment. "But so far we've only got 1 or 2 horses running. That's not enough. Since people already know my name, whether it be through fame or infamy, I don't think we have to do too much work to get my face out there. People already know who I am. What's important is to make our message clear despite all the detractors, trying to turn us into the scapegoats for everything that's going wrong. And I think a good way to both achieve that, and fix the too few horses problem, is to really get it out there that there are people who support us. The galaxy needs to see that those who we want to support really do need and appreciate it. Well, at least, hopefully. Therefore, I really think it's important to work with other candidates. I mean, if we don't have to worry about votes for ourselves, we might as well worry about getting other people into the race, who weren't as lucky while also showing that we really do want to help people. 2 birds with 1 stone and all that." While most people sort of nodded along with him, one particularly large head turned in his direction, with 4 eyes zeroing in on his face. "Who knows? Maybe I should candidate as well," Conglorch commented, in a low, humorous grumble. "If you can do it, it can't be that hard." James laughed. Hey, I'm not going to stop you. Not any of you, in fact. I've been granted basically limited resources when it comes to a single campaign, so why not make use of them? If any of you want to put yourselves out there, I'm going to support that, he then mentioned, a bit more seriously, and looked around. Not that he really expected anyone to react, but he wanted to put it out there. I don't think I could handle that sort of public attention, Curie quickly replied in clarification, and slightly shook their metal body. I would very much like to get my own affairs in order for the time being, so I can fully support you in what you are doing.
And while I would by no means be the oldest possible candidate going into the race, I do not think my age would do me any favours.
Moore agreed with Curie's assessment of having no interest in joining into the political race.
I think I, too, would be much better served with simply offering my support to you, to show the galaxy that even people they perceive as normal can be on your side without problem.
I have to agree, Admiral said, and now also leaned back onto his hands. We'll form a much stronger picture if he decidedly have your back. It's alright if one or two of us really want to throw our hats into the ring as well, but we shouldn't spread ourselves too thin here. There was a bit of murmuring again, before Athena suddenly tilted her head at James. But speaking of the idea, maybe Avesalon herself should candidate, she offered, as an idea, and briefly ran a hand through her long hair. Everybody looked at her in surprise for a moment. For you of all people to be the one to bring that up, Tuya mumbled for a moment, but she was quickly silenced by an imperious gesture from the captain. It's not that I actually expect her to clear the vote threshold, just so we're clear. Athena then quickly clarified, with a slightly annoyed tone. I'm just saying, wouldn't it be better for the realized to advocate for herself, instead of simply having her patron do it? I at least would respect someone more if they tried to stand up for themselves, instead of only having other people do it. There was a slight hint of bitterness present in her voice as she spoke. Would that even be allowed? Tuya soon inquired, with an honestly confused tone, seemingly thinking about all the technicalities that would probably prevent an AI from becoming a candidate. Well, realized are officially recognized as sapient beings, and she was born on a community planet. We should automatically make her a citizen, in theory, James mumbled, after a moment of thought, his forehead wrinkling and eyes staring upwards as he pondered the possibility as well. But she doesn't really have a genetic code to register with, Sheeta threw out there in return. I don't know if there is a method to register yourself without your genetic code as an ID. Unsurprisingly, something like this isn't really planned for in the community's electoral processes. And good luck getting anyone to try and make an exception for her. Yeah, you're probably right, James agreed, after giving it a moment of thought. I think she will also have to play a supporting role, though that doesn't mean she can't advocate for herself. Now that her existence has become a major part of our campaign, we might as well have her speak for herself at some events. The more the galaxy gets to know her, the less scary she will hopefully become for the people. Of course, we don't have nearly as much time as is necessary for that, but hey, we can still try. His torrent of words was momentarily interrupted by an unexpected yawn sneaking itself out of his lips, and he quickly covered his mouth as it opened widely on its own. The sudden reflex was so strong that his eyes began to tear up slightly as he tried his best to suppress it in order to finish his sentence. And as yawns tended to do among a group full of humans, it quickly spread through the entire room, infecting one after another and making the entire round of the circle. Although the one most affected by it appeared to be Sheeta, which was strange because Miat usually weren't victims to the same kind of contagious yawning that humans had developed in their social evolution. Say, Nia then began to ask with narrowing eyes, looking at her brother and his girlfriend suspiciously once her own yawning subsided. How much did you two sleep recently? Not enough, Sheeta immediately replied, before James even had the chance to, dropping sideways to lean against James. He was a bit surprised that she would so outright admit it, But it seemed that after the extensive yawn, tiredness had managed to override any of her usual pride, momentarily. It had obviously been the straw that broke the camel's back here. Then maybe it's about time that you two get some serious rest. After all, what's coming isn't going to become any less stressful anytime soon, especially not for the both of you, she strictly suggested, before glancing around at everyone else. What do you all say? I think this is a conversation we can just as well finish tomorrow, when everyone's fresh and ready. After all, reason is on the case now, so there's no need for you to constantly be attentive anymore. You can fully focus on your own tasks now.
I second the idea,
Moore immediately said, also sounding rather firm.
You two need to rest if you want to help anyone, and right now no one is being helped by you slaving away any longer. Everything is taken care of for the time being. Use this moment while it is still there.
Now that the floodgates had opened, James soon yawned again as he tried to think of a reply. I know that, he said hesitantly. His voice warped from the involuntary deep breath. It just feels like the moment I close my eyes, something crazy might happen again.
And if it does, you being awake for it will not change a thing either,
Moore returned in a stern voice.
If you want to start being proactive, then the right moment for that will be after you have rested up. We have leads now. We have things we can do. And you will be best prepared to tackle them once you are rested and alert. The election will go on for months. You would not want to blunder your chances because you refuse to take just a couple of hours to rest.
She's right, James, Coco chimed in. People don't vote for sleep-deprived zombies. That's the kind of politicians they want to have once they are elected, not before that. She chuckled mildly. At least do it for your girl. Just look at her, she then added onto that, with a glance at Sheeda, who seemed to have completely crashed against James's shoulder by now. James sighed deeply. Yeah, you're right again, he said and looked around. Anyone mind if we move this to tomorrow after the conference? There was a general shaking of heads, and everyone already started to get up in order to take their leave from James's and Sheeda's shared room. We'll all take the meantime to plan what we can all offer in support, specifically, so when you wake up there'll be a plan already waiting for you at once, Admiral assured him, waiting next to the door for everyone else to walk out. Thank you, everyone, James nodded, and waved them goodbye. No need to thank us, Conglor said as he stomped out with a deep bellow. Make sure you don't lose your plates, Dancer, and good night. James chuckled. I will, he said. Good night, everyone. Then, soon enough, the room was cleared out, leaving only him and Sheeda behind. He leaned his head against Sheeda's, which still laid on his shoulder. Her wrist twitched slightly at the contact, but he could feel her press herself to him a bit more. You all right, Treasure? He asked her gently. Without much hesitation, Sheeda hinted at a shaking of her head, without actually moving it much. No, she admitted. I don't think I am. James exhaled deeply. Honestly, I don't think I am either, he said. I know it's totally obvious, but I can't wait for all this to be over. Sheeda was quiet for a long moment. Then she lifted her head to look at him directly. Do you still plan to do it? She asked him, with an almost completely neutral expression. James was a bit confused, and swiped some hair out of his face. It had started to grow annoyingly long again. Maybe he should ask Nia to help cut it. Do what? He then inquired, and tilted his head slightly as he looked at Sheeda's face. Turn yourself in once this is all over, Sheeda clarified, and stared into his eyes. I don't think anyone really expects you to do it. James's face fell a bit flat, and his expression darkened slightly as she brought the topic up. Oh, he said, and inhaled deeply as he thought how to answer that in the most tactful way. Staring up at the ceiling while he did. I don't think I'm going to have much of a choice on the matter. Once my immunity ends, people are going to come for me, but Even if they weren't, I would still do it. I've got to stand up for the things I did. Sheeta exhaled, slowly. It didn't seem like she really wanted to argue. Still, as she allowed her head to fall against his shoulder again, she couldn't help but question. But haven't you done enough already? You're trying so hard to help people, and I don't think those who hurt you are going to stand up for it of their own accord once this is all over. James exhaled slowly through his nose. And I don't really see those people as my moral idols, he said, tinging his voice with the slightest hint of humour. However, then he turned more melancholic again as he continued. Anyway, it's not up for me to decide if I made up for what I did or not. I mean, I know what other people have done in the meantime, and even before that was far worse than any stupid thing I did. But that doesn't mean I can just shed my responsibility. I guess it will remain to be seen what the galaxy has to say about it when that time comes. Sheeta sighed with him. I know I'm not usually clingy, but I don't want to let you go, she admitted, closing her arms around his, in an effort to hold him close. James leaned against her with more of his weight. I know, he said with his eyes closed, and I'm sorry. But for now we have to worry about even getting there in the first place. Sheeta nodded, and James could feel her hands clench around his arm tightly. We will make sure each and every one of them will get exactly what is coming to them, she said in a low growl, and some of the hair on her head began to stand, while her tail started to sweep the ground in wide swings. Every single one. James took a deep breath and glanced down at her in some concern. Yeah, he said hesitantly, not because he didn't agree, but because this still seemed to take a lot out of Sheeta. After a moment of hesitation, he cleared his throat and asked, Hey, Treasure? How have your talks with Coco been going? Any progress of looking into the therapy? Sheeta sighed, and her hair began to settle down again. Barely, she admitted, and nuzzled up to him a bit tighter. There wasn't that much time for it with everything going on, but I promised that I will get it, and I'm going to do it. The tight grip she had on his arm relaxed a bit, but still held on, reassuringly. James smiled at her, and leaned his head down to give her a kiss on the forehead. She just squeezed her eyes shut and made a face as he did, but as soon as he pulled his lips away again, she began to purr mildly, and rubbed her head against him more firmly. I love you, James said quietly. I know things are hard right now, but I want you to know that. Sheeta's purring got a bit more intense. I love you too, she replied with a vibrating voice. It's hard to focus on it sometimes, but don't ever doubt that you're one of the most important things to me right now, even if it doesn't always seem like it. James let out a long, deep exhale. It's hard to be lovey-dovey when you're trying to change the world, he admitted to both her and himself, as he stared down to the ground. Then, a moment later, he shuddered slightly, as he felt a rough tongue drag along his neck. Then let's do as the old lady said and use the moment, Sheeta suggested with a mild smirk, as he turned his head to look at her after the sudden lick. Then she leaned in, putting a hand on the back of his head and pulling him closer, as she pressed her lips onto his, without any sign of discomfort for once. Closing his eyes as he enjoyed the rare feeling, James smiled as they broke away from each other again. Yeah, he said, as he began to stand up so he could make his way over to the bed. But once he stood, he couldn't help but let out yet another exhale. I'm tired, he admitted into the silence of the room. Yeah, Sheeta said, as she stood up with him, leaning against the side. Me too. With her fingers drumming on the armrest of her commander's chair, Admiral Krieger leaned back slightly, as her eyes glided over the lines of the first reports of the agents sent out to Net Narrator station. Her expression was firm and her eyes narrowed a bit as she took in the words. Well, well, well. Someone's been really naughty. she mumbled to herself, as she mentally followed the proposed method of how the attack and the following escape were conducted in the middle of a populated station. I see. So someone really knows their stuff when it comes to computers. If I didn't know better, I would have thought this was the work of a realized on first sight. The investigator on line with her admitted stiffly, as he waited for her to finish reading the report. However, after looking into it more, that luckily became unlikely. Although I am afraid some others might still reach that conclusion if they failed to follow everything to its logical end. The Admiral sighed slightly. It would be an easy accusation to make, she admitted, and lifted her eyes to look at the investigator on her screen as she continued the conversation. So, you found the trail by following the path of what evidence has been erased, rather than what hasn't been, correct? The man nodded, firmly. Yes, ma'am. Although the data flow of the entire station seems to have been tampered with, in cooperation with the local forces and eyewitness reports, we were able to reconstruct a path in which a more complete erasure seems to have taken place, while in many other places of the station only the least and the most secure systems were compromised, while the intermediaries were often left untouched, he confirmed. Although we were not able to restore any of the data yet, investigations into the locations indicate that we at least discovered the direct route they have taken and the necessary systems they had access to do it. Whether every system was breached or they were willingly granted access to some of them is yet to be seen. The Admiral nodded. I see. Still, you've done very good work for the short time you've had available so far, Agent. She praised the man. Keep me up to date on anything else you find out. I want immediate reports. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, the agent said, and straightened his posture. Speaking of which, if I could momentarily direct your attention to page 25 of the report. It is where the second part begins. Second part, Admiral Krieger said with some intrigue, and began to jump straight to the page that was pointed out to her. Indeed, ma'am, the agent confirmed, with his stiff posture staying around. Reason did some digging into the smugglers that Major Kojukaru and his team apprehended. While the other two seemed to be of no major interest, outside of their involvement in current events, we discovered that Ortal Berezi appears to have a military background. According to our data, he served in the Sovereign Fleet of Mars for 6 years, after coming of age. The Admiral raised her eyebrows in mild surprise. 6 years? He must have made quite the career during that time, she murmured to herself, while her eyes sunk into the text of the report once again. He never got commissioned, but he made it to Master Chief Petty Officer before he was dishonorably discharged after a skirmish between the Martian and the lunar fleets. Apparently he gave an unauthorized order to retreat that cost him his position, the agent continued to inform her. It is so far unclear what happened to him between then and now. However, the suspicions are high that some of his old shipmates may be his described contacts into the military. Some of them have joined the UHSDF's ranks since then. The Admiral narrowed her eyes for a moment. I hope I'm assuming correctly that you are already investigating those people, she questioned directly, although despite her strict tone, she had little doubt that reason was already on the case. Of course, ma'am, the agent affirmed with a stiff nod. Although his testimony once he awakens will still be valuable to us, we are confident that we will be able to unearth his contacts, even entirely without his cooperation. The Admiral smiled, with only the corner of her mouth. Good, she said firmly. The less we need to rely on others to find the gaps in our own armor, the better. I will get into personal contact with Mars Fleet Admiral to make sure your agents will get all the information they need. The agent nodded, stiffly once again. Anything less urgent you need to know can be found in the report, he said, clearly indicating that that was all he immediately had to tell her. Very well, the Admiral said, and sat up a bit straighter as she looked directly at him. Keep up the good work. You are dismissed. The man nodded and gave a brief bow before the connection was cut. Admiral Krieger then looked down again, taking her time to thoroughly read the report now that she had the time to do so uninterrupted. However, it seemed that, as per usual, the really interesting bits had been the ones that the agent had already urged her to go over immediately. So the extra little tidbits that she learned from the rest of the report, while important for her work and planning, weren't especially enlightening on any particular front. Sadly, there seemed to still be little sign about the actual leaks in their organization that managed to give out something more important than some simple breath filters. With not a single sign of a mole having appeared so far, it became more and more likely that their communications had simply been compromised at some point after the discovery of a Veselon, and it seemed less and less likely that someone had sold them out. However, how such a thing was possible was also yet to be explained. Then again, according to both Reason's reports and the ramblings of that paranoid former councilman, they appeared to be dealing with some group or individual amongst their opposition who was able to reach a level of cyber warfare that was at least vaguely comparable to the incredible capabilities of a realized, which, outside of vast government operations, was generally unheard of. An enemy they could not afford to underestimate, especially with the entire galaxy just waiting for a Veselon to slip up and give them a reason to immediately declare all-out war on her. If someone would manage to imitate her convincingly enough, that could spell for a very bad end, especially after their opposition had already shown a willingness to do just that. They would have to uproot this problem quickly. Luckily, they now had a target they could actually focus in on, one that didn't have the entire galaxy as a shield between them and the UHSTF sites. Alexander Page. He better not have underestimated his enemies either. Otherwise, he would soon learn why the UHSTF had a quite deadly reputation. He could try and hide his traces all he wanted, but they would find him eventually. As she grimly thought to herself like that, her sharp eyes briefly drifted over some more of her screens, and they briefly stuck to one that had some of the ongoing news displayed for her. And she couldn't help but silently smile to herself as she read over one of the headlines. "Global support for James Aldwin in the upcoming election," it said. Beneath it was a picture of the Council of Governance in the middle of a standing ovation for Representative Kumar, who was currently speaking at a podium. The Admiral's smile grew a bit wider as she read over the headline a couple more times while letting out a wistful sigh. Not quite what she had imagined, but in the end, that boy was finally growing into his own. He had sure taken his sweet time with it. Then she swung her view over to another screen, where a wanted picture of Alexander Page was displayed for her. The drumming of her fingers on her armrest stopped momentarily, as she gripped onto it tightly instead. Her eyes glared at the picture, as she thought, "You have chosen the wrong person to mess with." The next day, James slowly blinked awake in the darkness of his room. Immediately, he could feel Sheeda's body still pressed against him, as her chest gently rose and sank with each shallow breath she took. No matter how much he would try, there was no way for him to sneak out of the bed without waking her up in the process, and so he decided to simply rip the band-aid off as he quickly pushed himself out of her arms with gentle force. Sheeda made a few sleepy, confused grunts as she was ripped from her dreams by his movements, but James quickly pulled the covers over her and gently pushed her into the mattress, while leaning down to kiss her hair. "It's just me, treasure," he gently assured her, while coaxing her to nuzzle into the sheets again. "You can keep sleeping. I'll wake you in a bit." Sheeda squirmed for a moment, but after a couple more soft reassurances, she finally rolled herself up in the blanket and faced away from him with a long exhale as she relaxed. Feeling around the dark room so he wouldn't have to turn the light on, James grabbed a fresh change of clothes for himself before disappearing into the bathroom. Not long after, he emerged fresh and ready for the day, and he quietly sneaked through the room towards the hatch in the ceiling, slipping out of the room while trying to make minimal noise before locking the hatch behind him. Most likely he had still woken Sheeta up once again in the process, but hopefully she would quickly drift off again. He felt pretty bad about keeping her awake as long as he usually did, considering that Miat needed a good bit more sleep than humans did. Once on the roof, he quickly looked around for anything that might seem like trouble. Not spotting any signs of angry protesters or overstepping parents, he breathed a sigh of relief and pulled out his phone to quickly shoot a message into the group communications that he was up, and if he was needed anywhere. A quick glance at the clock had already told him that it was still a good bit until the next conference needed him to attend, so he still had a bit of time in between to help out on any other front, where it may be necessary.
Out with the children once again. Feel free to join us if you wish.
Moore's reply came first, to which James replied, "Maybe later," with a smile. "We've got things under control here, but don't go wandering off on your own." Coco felt the need to remind him a moment later. "Got it, boss," James sarcastically replied. Not like he planned on strutting his stuff across the station all by himself. "Busy." Curie's answer was short and sweet, and James couldn't blame them. He assumed they had a mountain of paperwork to get through with their lawyers, considering all the claims they had to most likely counter and find precedent for. "Good luck with that," he replied, and let out a brief sigh, putting his hand on his hip as he pondered what else there would be to do. He felt a bit too wired right now to even consider going back to bed. He was in the middle of taking a deep breath when his phone finally dinged with another notification. "Come to room 139, the new message read. It had come from Conglorch. James lifted an eyebrow at the simultaneously very clear and incredibly vague order. However, he had nothing better to do, and he definitely didn't expect a trap out of the Lizzator of all people, since he was the closest thing James had ever had to an actual partner in crime. Therefore, he quickly followed the invitation, glancing down at the coloured lines on the roof that would lead him to different areas of the hive, including specific lists of numbered rooms. That way it didn't take him more than 5 minutes until he was on the right path to the mentioned room. Standing above the hatch number 139, James pushed the doorbell. Quickly, he swiped some hair out of his face as he waited to be granted entrance. Soon enough, the hatch was opened for him, with the stairs that led down into the room immediately revealing 2 familiar Lakshaseth sitting on the bottom step, turning their heads almost 180 degrees around to look up at him. After he took a few more steps down, 2 more people became visible. Morgoth, who was so enormous that he had to stay either crouched or on all 6s at all times, so he wouldn't bump his head against even the quite high ceilings of the normal hive rooms, and the very person that had invited him here. Conglorch's fiery eyes all focused on James for a moment, before they returned to looking at most of the other people in the room at the same time. James wondered what this little get-together was about exactly, and only as he reached the very bottom of the stairs did he notice that there was actually one more person that graced them with his presence. After nervously cowering in the corner seemingly the entire time before, Losarana immediately darted towards James as soon as he had reached the bottom of the stairs, with the 2 Vulpines sitting there quickly making room for him. Without an ounce of hesitation, the small Pixameria quickly scaled the larger primate with relative ease, and settled all the way up on James's shoulders, holding onto the human tightly with all 4 of his arms and both legs, wherever he could comfortably grab him. At first, James intended to be upset at being used as a jungle gym, but he quickly reconsidered when he realised that the much smaller man was slightly trembling on his shoulder, with the motion being easily felt through just how tightly he was holding on. It seemed like the man had probably reached his limit to a degree when it came to interacting with Deathworlders and large predators. "Hello to you too," James therefore greeted the man instead of being upset with him, hoping that his presence would be somewhat calming to the small primate, despite the fact that James ticked the boxes for both Deathworlder and comparatively large predator as well.
"Hello, Ambassador,"
Losarana quickly said, with slightly shallow breaths, and swallowed heavily.
"Forgive me for assaulting you like this. It seems my nerves may have taken me a bit."
No problem, James said, keeping his composure as he glanced around. But would anyone maybe be so kind to explain to me what is going on here? The others in the room glanced around for a moment, seemingly wordlessly trying to decide who was going to do the explaining. Konglorch crossed his massive arms, clearly indicating he wouldn't be the one to take over for them. After only a few moments of silent back and forth, it was finally Morgoth who cleared his throat loudly.
"Well, Ambassador, we would like to,"
he said, and needed to clear his throat again, cutting off his sentence as he seemed to be uncharacteristically coy about what he wanted to ask.
"We would like to properly meet the realized."
It was surprisingly Ajaxia who finished the sentence for him. Her yellow, artificial eye burned into James, as she stared him down after making the request.
"We believe it is about time."